as you're evaluating all of this and, how real is this 19-20 game stretch and how much can you project forward and all that kind of stuff, what's the reason to believe that this team as constituted would have a better chance in a tough first round matchup like that Knicks series this time around? I think one thing that's really valuable to look at is, well, why, as you mentioned, why did they lose that series? What were the issues that they had in that series? And so much of it was defensive rebounding and outside shooting, right? Like you couldn't keep the Knicks off the offensive glass. And when they packed the paint and dared you to make threes, the Cavs were unable to do it. A stat that I found in this that blew my mind, not to bring up bad old times, but we're here, is the Cavs defensive rebounding percentage in that series was 60.6%, which would have finished dead last in the league in each of the previous 25 regular seasons. The only team in the like NBA.com advanced stats drop down menu of each year, the only team that was worse was the 97-98 Raptors. So it's like, oof. if your rebounding was 97-98 Raptors level, not getting it done. I believe that team won 16 games. So not what you're looking for in a first round playoff series. And then the 3-point shooting, as we talked about, the Knicks dared them. And even within that daring, the Cavs only got up, I think like 31 or a game or so. And they missed more than 2/3 of them. So it's like, if you knew what the problems were, we got to clear the glass better. And we've got to be able to generate and make threes at a higher clip. During this run, Cavs defensive rebounding rate, up over 75%. That's the best in the NBA since December 15th. 3-point attempts per game, just under 42, second in the NBA in that stretch. And 3-point shooting, 37.2%, which is right outside the top 10. So this is, as you mentioned, it's not just, are we finding the value on the margins? Are we maximizing the talent that we've got? Do we have all-star contributors? We think we had these, ABC problems, and can we address them? Obviously, the signing of Strus was a huge part of that. Bringing in George Niang is a huge part of that. Finding Merrill is a huge part of that, but also ongoing development and better health from Okoro and Wade. And now suddenly you look at a roster that's got a bunch of different options to answer these kinds of questions. And here's where we get back to the existential crisis, Justin, because all of those numbers pointing in the right direction happened without, or most of them happened without Mobley on the floor and without Garland on the floor. Mobley comes back last night on a minutes restriction, only about 20 minutes. And you saw, the immediate value of like, oh, he's a grab and go playmaker that can go the length of the floor, take it end to end and dunk in traffic. He is, again, as you mentioned, we have 48 minutes of elite rim protection, interior defense, switchability from our 5, and then also a guy who can be a playmaker and a connector that it has immense value. There's also, it's still, when they're both on the floor together, when Allen and Mobley were on the floor together, there were some really great defensive moments, and there were some points where the offense looked a little bit rickety. Some of that is just going to be rust, but some of that is also maybe baked into the structure of it. When you've seen how comfortable everything looked with the spread floor, does it give you any pause about the too big construction, or do you feel like we've seen it be successful enough in the regular season, we believe that the fundamentals there make sense and the staggering component makes sense, like we just got to continue to sort of damn the torpedoes with it and see if more reps gets us where we want to go?
I'm going to be nervous because I'm that way by nature. I'm always going to be a little fearful, like anytime you're going to have success.
A less successful rap group, nervous by nature.
I'm going to sit there, and anytime there's success, I'm going to be like, is the other shoe going to drop? And yes. That's part of being a Cleveland and Winnipeg sports fan. That's baked into it.
Yeah, you really got a twofer going there, man.
We're really Cleveland North, or Cleveland is Winnipeg South. Like, there's too many parallels. The Jets got taken away. The Browns got taken away. Like, it's a mess. But what I always kind of keep in mind is like the struggles early this season weren't because the core didn't work together. It was because they weren't playing together. Like there was no real continuity. The starting lineup has only got 11 games together. And during that stretch, Garland was dealing with a hamstring injury. Mitchell was dealing with a hamstring injury. Darius had a shooting hand issue that was plaguing him for about a month, where he had a wrap on. He was holding his hand all the time, wasn't taking threes. Like that's going to make things difficult. And even with that, they still had a +6 net rating as a starting unit. And what gives me some confidence is I look at last year's stats, and I have to look at last year's sample size because we just don't have one for this year.
Right.
And their starting lineup with Isaac Okoro actually had a 122 offensive rating, which is better than their offensive rating of 120 during this stretch. And I just have a hard time getting my head around the idea that replacing Isaac Okoro with Max Strus is going to hurt the offense. And so my conclusion is Garland and Mitchell not playing up to their standards early in the year was the bigger factor. And when you look at last year, the two big lineup actually was better offensively. Like when both of the bigs were on the court, they had a 119 offensive rating. It was about 115 with just Mobley and 115 with just Allen. And the biggest thing is last year, they didn't have the personnel to kind of play that 4 out when they were staggering. Even the two big lineup against the Knicks, even with how poorly they all played offensively. And you were talking about haunting stats. The one you didn't bring up that continues to haunt me to this day. If you had to guess Evan Mobley's points per possession as a role man in that Knicks series, where would you go?
Oh man, there weren't very many good ones that I can recall. I would go under 0.75.
Yeah, so it was 0.08.
Oh,
he scored
okay.
1 point.
So I'd cash the under then. Okay, good to know.
Yeah,
good to know.
Yeah. And like the whole thing is like when people talk about you can't win around, a small backcourt or a small guard as your best player. What that usually means is defenses are able to kind of key in and throw length at those guys, and it impacts their ability to impact the game. The only time you see that work, whether it's, Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet at both sub 6 feet, or Steph Curry, is if you have a front court playmaker that's able to be that hub and kind of provide some initiation. Like, I think for this Cavs kind of model to work, Evan Mobley needs to be that hub to alleviate the pressure when teams trap Garland, when they trap Mobley, or trap Mitchell, rather. Like, he needs to be that playmaker. Jared Allen needs to be that playmaker because you don't really have it on the wing. And he came up short in that scenario. The other haunting stat, Mitchell took about 9 open shots a game and shot 40% on them. Like, if any of those things go differently with like how close some of those games were, that would be helpful for the Cavs. But when I look at how good they were as a 4-man group, 121 offensive rating last year as a 4-man group, the Garland-Mobley lineup without Mitchell and Allen at a plus 12 net rating. The one that wasn't as strong, only plus 8, which is still pretty good, is that Mitchell and Allen. So if you now have them developing a stronger chemistry together, we already know Garland and Mobley works. We already know the 4 together works. Now you can get that 48 minutes of sustained offense. And as much as people focus on the starting group, if the two bigs are playing about 34 minutes a night, you're probably looking at about 18 together. And the remaining 30 of the 48 minutes is going to be 4-out offense. So if you can get those 18 to be good offensively and defensively, and the other 30, you're better offensively, and you take a small step back defensively, I think that's a sustainable path to success. I'm losing my voice.